Hi there, and welcome to Ecochain's Got Data webinar. I'm your host, Hani Larma, and this is where we come to you with our very practical knowledge sharing interviews. They were originally recorded during our live webinars. Here we speak with our own environmental specialists and awesome clients about what is possible in the world of improving your product's environmental footprint. Stay tuned. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining the webinar on truly sustainable materials and apparel. So why are we all here today? I think most of us want to create really amazing, sustainable products, but maybe are struggling with which material we should be using, which fabric or material is actually better for the environment, and how can we know which fabric we should be choosing for our apparel products? So I'm Hani Larma, and for the next hour, we're going to be answering just this. We're going to be sharing how you can choose sustainable materials for your products, also using some concrete examples. So today I have with me our lovely speakers, Anik, who's an environmental specialist here at Ecochain, and also our lovely client, BYBORRE. Barbara, the Impact and Innovation Director there, will be joining us a little bit later as well to speak about their journey in choosing sustainable materials for their apparel products. So why are we a good source of knowledge on this topic? Well, at Ecochain, we've been working in environmental footprinting of products for over 10 years. And we have clients coming to us with pretty similar questions and struggles as maybe some of you might be having. So they want to improve the sustainability of their products. And this also includes which materials they should be choosing. So we actually have two software tools, which we help our clients use to make their products more sustainable. And indeed, this is also about comparing and choosing different materials. So yes, hi, welcome Anik as well. You're going to be joining me in the conversation to speak about how we do this at Ecochain and also using a concrete example of a t-shirt.
Yes, thanks. Good to be here.
Nice. Okay, so to start off this webinar, we wanted to kick it off with picking your brain a little bit about what you think is more sustainable. So we have a little poll, and that is which material is more sustainable? What do you think? Is it polyester or cotton? Okay, 73% for cotton and 27% for polyester. Okay, I don't want to confuse you guys, but I have some good and some bad news, which is that for these materials, there's not really a right or wrong answer. So none of you are right and none of you are wrong. And indeed, we want to focus on solutions here and not give you more confusing statements. So Anik, maybe you can explain a little bit what's going on.
Yes, definitely. So it really depends on what exactly you are looking to in terms of sustainability. If you would focus on the impact on global warming potential, you could say that cotton is more sustainable because it needs a lower fuel equivalent if you calculate it. However, if you look at different impact categories, for example, energy of water, it could be the case that in that sense, polyester would be a more sustainable choice. So in that sense, it really depends on what it is that you think or define as more sustainable.
So it's kind of funny to think about it, but in the end, there isn't necessarily one right answer that we can give you for what is that most sustainable fabric or material out there. But as you mentioned, Anik, it really depends on those environmental impact goals that you've set for your company and your product. So indeed, here you can see that within polyester, it's higher on the CO2, but actually has the lesser impact on water, for example. So if that's something that's important for your company, then you can consider what is the better choice in that sense. I think what would be really good to kind of start off with is to kind of recap what are the most important steps when you are making this process. So this is kind of the three main things that happen in a life cycle assessment, which is what we use to help our clients to make their products more sustainable. So this is the measure, compare, improve. So Annie, could you maybe talk us through a little bit of these steps?
Yeah, so where you start is actually with knowing what happens inside your products and measuring what happens in your product supply chain. So what are the supply chain steps that are taken to get to an end results? Yeah, and the first thing to look at is, for example, the raw materials. Where do they come from? What type of raw materials do you have? Then they need to process. So what we do with those raw materials to get your product in the end? And transportation, they need to be transported to your facility or maybe to a client. And yeah, that after you sell the product, things are happening to it as well. So every step in your supply chain has effects on what the impact of the product is in that sense, which you need to measure first.
Right. So in this webinar, we're mainly going to be focusing on the raw material stage.
Exactly. Yeah.
So next we have the compare, which is, we have this lovely image here, which I would like to call the Instagram versus reality. So what this kind of represents, of course, is that you might be looking at something and you have an assumption and you think something is a certain way, but when you kind of start zooming in, or in this case, zooming out, you realize that it actually might be something quite different than what you originally imagined. So, Ani, could you maybe talk a little bit about the importance of comparing different materials in this case?
Yes, it is very important to know what you compare to each other and whether it has the same function or it works in the same way in the products. I think we will zoom into that later as well. But for example, in the example we just had about polyester and cotton, you see that if you look at one perspective, the one item might be more sustainable. But if you look at another perspective, the other might be more sustainable. So knowing what you compare and where you compare things to is something that's
Exactly. Amazing. And then lastly, we have improve, which I think is why most of us are here today, to learn about how we can get to this step. So if you can shortly explain about this as well.
yeah. Once you know what you are going to is happening in your product and what would be potential choices to improve that product, you could make those decisions. But it is good to keep in mind that one improvement is not the end goal. You can continue improve and measure and compare with the other one. I
Right.
like to see what is happening with it.
Exactly. So it's that continuous cycle, as we saw in a few slides earlier.
Exactly. Yeah.
We want to really showcase how you can do this process for your own products and how we would go about doing these comparisons. And then lastly, the improvements. So, Anik, you're going to be showing us how you would do this process as an environmental specialist and select the different materials which are the more sustainable depending on the goals that you have set for your product. And it's going to be an example of a t-shirt, correct?
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
And of course, this is one example, but you could use these same processes and these steps to, for example, improve a water bottle or any other type of product, if that was the type of product that you had in your company.
Yeah, that's true. This also, this of course is not exclusively possible for apparel, but also for mental health products. Yeah, so welcome to the Mobius environment, to where we do the LCA calculations in. And so as you can see here on top is that stone t-shirts were modeled with different materials. So I will show you now what is inside those t-shirts. As explained previously, for lifecycle assessment, you take all the steps in the supply chain into account. So here the t-shirt is modeled from cradle to gate, which means that the production steps are taken into account. And you see the materials that are used, the packaging which is used for the t-shirts, different production step to get from fiber to like fabric to the end products in the shirt itself, and transport from materials.
Amazing. So what you're showing here, Nick, is the kind of initial step, for example, for modeling. This t-shirt is from cotton, correct?
Exactly. And if you then want to take a look at what would be different if I made a t-shirt from polyester, just taking the example from the poll here as well, I've modeled the exact same t-shirt from polyester too. And in this way, you can compare them to each other. And what you see here is that the packaging, the production process, the transports, they are all exactly the same. But the only thing that has been changed is the material, the main raw materials that are used for the product. And they end up with different results here for climate change. So that is the impact category that we are.
Right. So here you can kind of see that if you would be modeling the exact same t-shirt, that just changing that material, you could really compare them and see, okay, this material actually does change the CO2 impacts of the t-shirt, even if all of the other steps are the same. The material choice really makes a difference in this case.
Yes, exactly. And also for other impact categories, you can see that results. So here you can see the different impact categories. And if you, for example, want to look at the water use, you can also see that they are exactly the same for the things that you kept the same. But for the materials, they are different. And the difference is, has a higher volume than polyester.
Right. And so, Anik, for people here who might not have done such a comparison yet, what would be the first step of actually doing the comparison?
Yeah, so the first step would actually be knowing what would be another possibility for the product. So in this case, we use cotton versus polyester, but it might not be an option for your product. So it is possible to use different types of fibers here and compare those to each other. And the other thing that needs to be taken into account, because this is of course a made-up product in a very basic way of displaying what the differences is if you change one thing, but maybe if you change your cotton fibers into polyester fibers in this case, it will influence some of the production process, or it will require all the packaging, or you will get it from a different location. So also your transport will differ. So there are many things like the supply chain is always interlinked with each other in that sense, and that there could be other things that change as well. So this is what you could take into account for those.
So basically, from the starting point, that would be knowing what is in your product. So gathering information about your own product first that you're currently producing, talking to the suppliers, gathering as much of that primary data as possible, the specific data to your products, because that will make the comparison also more accurate and reliable, because you know that you're comparing accurately your product to the potential new material. So that's going to give a better comparison, if I understand that correctly. And also then after that, you can also be in touch with your suppliers for the next step, which would be maybe discovering those different material options for your products.
Yeah, exactly. So in that sense, it's very good to take into account that, for example, for the modeling of this made of t-shirt product, we use a lot of database references. And those database references are a good starting point to see what the difference could be. But if you really want to zoom in your specific product in your specific case, getting that data will make your LCA even more accurate, product specific. And yeah, as all things sustainability is still an iterative process. So it will become better and better and more connected to your case.
Right. And how would you suggest that people go about this exploration and comparison phase? How could they start with testing the different materials? Where would they come up with those, for example?
It's always a starting point with the data that is available, of course. So if we go back to the cotton t-shirts, I think I want to go for an organic cotton t-shirts.
And that would kind of come from maybe the market going in the direction of pushing organic cotton, or maybe you saw one of your competitors is switched to organic cotton and you kind of want to verify if that's a good choice. Is that kind of how it starts out?
Yeah, exactly. And if you want to see if it's a good choice for you, you can see those data points, calculate those data points in for example, at LCA or this tool, see whether that would be something that works, then go towards the more specific. For example, location where it gets that organic cotton from. Yeah.
And what we're looking at here now is that the cotton versus the organic cotton has actually quite a big difference in the water usage.
Yeah, exactly. The reason for that is that in this data point that is used, it takes into account that organic cotton is always rain fed. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case for any type of organic cotton. With this data point, that would be the case, but maybe it's another more specific data point.
When would you start to actually make the decisions about which product you should use? Would you go through all of the different impact categories, or do you set those impact categories earlier?
It is important, yeah, just as what we mentioned in the poll here, this is the right choice, this is the wrong choice. And that is what happens with sustainability all the time. I think the most important things are to know what you want to reach, like the goals that you want to reach with this product. And water use is a very important thing for your company and for your products. Then the focus should be on that. And if that's climate change, the focus should be on that. That's not a very satisfying answer, but it just has to do with a lot of different things.
And so to kind of summarize a little bit about what the steps are, you need to define the impact goals for your company and for that product, and probably also look at some maybe different options that you have. Not all products can use the same materials, of course. So you probably need to assess a little bit about what are the different criteria for the product that you're producing. Is it about the longevity? Maybe you need a different material in that case as well. And then the second step would be to kind of look at the different, based off of the options that you have of the different materials. Here we looked at cotton, organic cotton, polyester, and then test, compare with those different impact categories that we've chosen that as our most important ones. And then lastly, get super specific with the data that you are inputting, because in the end, if you're comparing very generic to very generic reference points, you're probably not going to get as accurate comparisons and accurate decision making as you would when you have that primary data and you've worked together with your suppliers to really have the good data and input it into the right categories and make that decision with that final data.
I think that's a very good summary. And in addition to that, it's always an ongoing process. So you can keep measuring and improving in that sense.
Right. So you can start also from somewhere and build into changing the material, maybe another moment again. So it's not a final choice that you need to make in that sense.
Yes, exactly. And in that sense, also data points are changing. New research is happening. New materials are being developed. So sustainable improvements are going on.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Aniek. Did you still have anything that you wanted to mention as a last kind of takeaway from this?
Yes, I think it's very important. Like LCA's calculations, data and transparency go hand in hand. And it's very important to keep track of all these separate parts.
Nice, perfect. So be transparent with the data that you're inputting, and also when you're communicating those different comparisons, for example. Well, thank you very much. Of course, if you want to also try out how this works for your product, maybe changing the different materials, if you already have some comparisons in mind, or you just want to see how this process could look like for your product, we also have a 14-day trial of the tool Mobius that Aniek was just showing the comparisons with. The t-shirt demo should also be there in case you just want to get started in testing that out as well. Perfect. Well, thank you a lot, Aniek. Now I would for BYBORRE to join me in the conversation to talk a little bit more about how you have done this process at BYBORRE and how that has looked like for your company.
Hi, Honey. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So firstly, I would love to just get right into it to learn a little bit more about why did you actually start measuring your products at BYBORRE?
I'll give you a little bit of context about BYBORRE. BYBORRE is a textile company, very design focused, and it's actually our mission to really help creators design textiles from the yarn up. And so in the industry, it's very normal to buy textiles off the shelf, but then you have very little influence over the environmental quality of the textiles that you purchase or that you source. So with us, you can actually select the yarn, literally design in our online tool, and then we produce for you on demand. And the reason that we started measuring the environmental impact of our textiles is that we figured, hey, we have a new way, like a new method of designing textiles. And we really kind of, our instinct was that it was, that it was different, at least, and from the conventional way of designing, sampling, and producing textiles. And we really wanted to validate that with data and see what the impact then was. So that was our first motivation to start measuring.
Right. Exactly. And like you mentioned, you already had this in mind from the beginning to make responsible and sustainable textiles. And that's so great to hear. I think there's a lot of companies out there who are also already creating something sustainable. But why did you feel the need to validate that with data? Where did that need come from?
I think on the one hand, because what you can't measure, you can't manage. And Anik has already shared a lot about the challenges and the ambiguity of sustainable materials. I usually talk about them as responsible materials because I feel once you have awareness of the decisions that you make when sourcing, it feels like more responsible behavior. So we really focus on the decision making along the design, sampling, and production stage. The whole reason is because you want to make progress. And also, we want it to be data driven, but also not forget the ample experience that is within our company with the yarn specialists, material specialists, the manufacturing specialists. And so we really wanted to combine that.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think that's really cool that you are able to you had a hunch about it being sustainable when you're actually able to get that measurable validation and also to show to maybe your suppliers and your customers that that is actually the case. So really amazing. And how did you get actually started with the measurement itself?
In 2019, we worked on preliminary research, so very much based on available kind of public data to calculate the possible savings. So we literally compared our design, sampling, and production method to conventional methods, but not in an LCA way, just very much with assumptions, as that already gave us a bit of insight in the differences between those kind of like processes or methods where kind of like the impact generators were located, so to say. And then it took us another year, so 2020, to actually decide, okay, we're going to do an LCA. And in 2021, so last year, my colleague Anisha made the real effort and actually executed the LCA in collaboration with Ecochain. And it's a great but also arduous process to contact all these suppliers. But that's also a huge opportunity to learn from your suppliers, to understand, so what is a narrative that I need to convey for them to get on board? So what is a win-win-win actually along our supply chain, or at least the parts that we have influence over?
Right. No, I think that's kind of a common thread that I hear often, that it's not the easiest to get suppliers on board, but it is a really important step. And that's what makes it in the end an easier job once you've done that work in the beginning and you're able to have that accurate primary data from your suppliers, or at least more specific data about how the products are produced. And in the end, it's kind of a win-win for everybody to be able to make more accurate decisions in the future.
Yes,
that's really cool. And so the textile industry is, of course, pretty specific with its usages of the product. So it's a little bit different, I think, than in maybe some other industries. What do you find most important to take into consideration when making environmentally friendly textiles?
I think because, we get the question from our clients all the time. And our clients, it's textiles in general. So it's not only apparel or fashion, it's interior, it's automotive, it's a whole range. And they always come to us and ask, what's the most sustainable material? And our way to work on this with them is to pose another question to them. So what is the functionality or the purpose of your product or of your textile? And that actually helps us guide them towards for them most responsible material. And so our method is to be quite, as an investigator, you really have to figure out, and also maybe perhaps challenge your client slightly to think deeper about what they want. And then we have built in our tool a range of textile packages. So that means we have combined a knitting technique, because we don't do woven textiles, we only do knitted textiles, of a knitting technique and a specific yarn, because we know that they go together perfectly and that they increase, longevity, durability, care, all the additional criteria that come with textiles, for interiors and profession.
Yeah, I think that also goes really well along with what Anik was mentioning earlier, that there isn't that one perfect sustainable material, like you mentioned, your clients are sometimes asking for. And it really depends on what your goals are. And you need to make decisions which are a bit give and take at times, but you can look at the different impact categories, such as in the cotton t-shirt, the polyester versus the cotton that we mentioned earlier, that it really depends on the impact categories that you're looking at. And therefore you need to make those choices. So that seems like what you've done with the durability and the longevity of those products as well.
So this is what we show on our platform, is actually a textile passport. So we make sure that everyone, based on the textiles package that they choose, can see what the impact is. And, these data it's not easy to understand just, if you get fed this textile passport. So they need some context. But for us, that's a conversation starter.
Yeah, exactly. And as this shows, you're able to, with the calculations that you made for your products, also give that accurate overview. And again, along with that transparency of what is happening in the products that you're producing, and able to show that also to the customers of your textiles. So that's really cool to see as well. And how did the design guidelines change for you after measuring? Was there something that you started to incorporate or change the way of doing things because of this information that you received?
So for one, we got more curious ourselves and more critical. And Anik rightly mentioned that, the source of your data really matters. And although it's very difficult to decide whether you're going to go with this or that data set, at least understanding what your input is decides the quality of the output. But what we're also building is a material index. So we're seeing, okay, so what do we actually consider a preferred material? Is that all about recycled content, or is it more about, organic or certifications, and what are kind of the no-goes? And if you kind of look at the trends in the industry, it's quite, not easy, but there is quite some sort of agreement on what's preferred these days, but again, stay critical. And we, I work with our knit lab, so where we at least sample all our knits, as the yarn specialists are there to really see, okay, does this tool actually improve your work? Does it make it easier? Because if it makes it easier for them, it will also help our clients, perhaps in the future.
Right. Oh, that's really cool. So you've really been able to take that data and make improvements in your ways of working, which is really great to hear as well. And what were some maybe surprising things? You mentioned there are some kind of maybe, not official standards, but maybe some things that are thought to be the best practices and that type of thing. But what were maybe some surprising information that you received from these measurements?
Yeah, so one said it's not black and white. And that already really helps. And I think it's you just really get to understand, like, on a deeper level. So an example is recycled synthetics. On the one hand, it's great because it's recycled. On the other hand, there's stories going around that, we kind of take plastic bottles out of their own recycling cycle. And so there is kind of, you can put a note with every material. And I think at least understanding and knowing about that note is really important.
So it kind of, again, goes along with that testing and staying curious, as you mentioned earlier, and being that investigator of your own product and really seeing what makes sense in the production of your product specifically as well. So it's not really this easy solution that we'd all love to have, but it's about the testing and the staying on top of what materials you might be able to use best for your product.
I would say it's not about good or bad decisions, but it's about making wise decisions.
Right. Wise words. And so we're almost at the end of our webinar, but I would love to hear, there might be some people who are now attending the webinar who are just getting started with this process. So they might want to improve their products, they are just at the beginning of it. What advice would you give to these companies?
I would literally advise them to be investigative. And on the one hand, data are great, but if you rely too much on your data and that direct everything, I would say you're also missing something. And so don't forget your industry knowledge, trust the experts in your company, keep challenging the data points and update them accordingly when you have new suppliers on board. So grow your database and in the end, have that also grow the confidence that you have in your products.
Amazing. Yeah, that's kind of similar to what Anique was saying about always challenging the previous measurement you did and keep on updating it and keep on improving the products simultaneously. Well, thanks a lot, Barbara. This was really, really insightful. And now we are at the part where we're going to answer your pressing questions in the chat.
Yeah. So this is actually the first question that came in, and it was during Anique's part where she was showing the different impact categories as a result of the cotton versus polyester t-shirt. And someone asked there, you changed the impact category to water use. We remember that. And is this water use in this specific case that you've shown, was it only referred to the manufacturing water use? So the manufacturing of the two raw materials.
Good question. So this is indeed water use that is happening throughout the whole supply chain of that raw material. So it in the data point, it goes back to what is happening behind that raw material. And in this case, the unit used is water used in cubic meters deprived, which means that item takes into account also water scarcity for ecosystems and drink water. So therefore, it's not like the exact amount of water that is used during that production process, but relatively to the scarcity.
Thank you. I hope that was a good answer to the person who asked it. Then we have a question, and this was in the beginning as well. We were talking about, you have the life cycle of a product. And for the specific case that we've shown in Mobius, we only use cradle to gate. So from the production of the raw materials until it leaves the factory. Is it also possible, I think this is specifically for Mobius, to expand this to, more steps in the life cycle? So until it's wasted or even recycled?
Yes, that's definitely possible. The example was just a cradle to gate analysis, but it's possible to take the whole life cycle and different steps into account. So there are processes for waste treatment, transportation, usage as well. So that can be included, yes.
All right, nice. Thank you. Then there was another question, and this also taps into, I think, the different data points that we've mentioned. Barbara mentioned that as well. So this person says that what do I do with all these definitions of different data points? Because often it becomes a little bit, difficult to make a suitable comparison because of the differences in definitions for certain data. Do you maybe have an answer on how this can be solved, or a tip?
So therefore, I think that the main thing is that we should look into what is happening with the data point. And if you compare it, well, you can see what is higher and what is lower. But looking into that exact data point, what is happening, we as environmental specialists at Ecochain do not always know what exactly is going on. I need to look for it as well. So it really requires research and getting into this topic of life cycle assessment.
Research, exactly. And Barbara, do you feel the same way with the answer of Anique?
Yes, and also, in these instances, we turn to Anique to help.
Yeah, so it is indeed difficult to have, different data points in the end, but there are databases that can help out with that. And also indeed what Barbara said, always be critical of the quality of the data that you get. And I think this is indeed an ongoing research topic. So I hope we help this person with this question. Then let me see. So then another person said, okay, so what about the impact of a location of a production? For example, Europe versus Asia. Is that something that you can as well calculate?
That is definitely possible to compare to each other. And the production in Europe would definitely be different, for example, than production in Asia, because, for example, you have different electricity mixes. That's our influence when you produce something. it is possible to choose different data points from different locations, which will then include location-specific data. And that will definitely be different, much the best.
Right. I think that would also, correct me if I'm wrong, it would be done in a quite similar manner than if you would change, for example, the cotton to organic cotton. You could also compare the different production locations of a certain material, for example, the organic cotton in a certain place versus another one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that would be done in similar ways. So choosing a data for cotton in India to cotton in China, for example. And then again, if you know more about the specific location and specific processes happening there, then you could make it more accurate.
Right. Having that primary data as the priority as well.
All right. Thank you so much. Then actually related to that, there is a question on the water use data that the difference between the cotton and organic, the comparison we had in the beginning, if that water use data was real or an assumption. Now, because the difference was so big. So how would you describe that? Is it assumed that the used water is recycled as well? I guess it isn't, right? Because we were saying until the factory gates. But why was that difference so big?
In this example, that has to do with the data points chosen. So probably if you choose another data point, then the difference is different. It was just an example, of course. The information behind the data point for organic cotton was that everything is rainfed, so there is no other water use included, which diminishes the water use in that data points. So yeah, that's really precise again. That makes more sense using primary data than data points.
Exactly.
It's quite subjective to the situation is kind of the main takeaway there.
All right, then let me see. Another question was, which background data does Ecochain Mobius use to calculate these impacts? Specifically the materials and processes specific to the textile industry. So what kind of database did you use for the demo in the beginning, Yannick?
Yeah, the database that I used is Ecochain. It's a Swiss company that provides their data points for Mobius.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is one of the biggest databases out there. And again, this of course gives a lot of good impact information. But here again, it's very important also in, of course, this industry, as both you and Barbara also have emphasized, and Honey as well, that we use as much primary data as possible to really make this as specific to an individual product as we can. Okay. So when you do a comparison of a product and you find a hotspot and you want to improve it, is it also possible to do a sensitivity test in Mobius? Nick, do you have an answer for that, or is that something we can send to this person later?
Yeah, let's do that. I think it's a very interesting question because it's like different.
All right. Then, so someone asked, do you build a database yourselves, or do you have a library database? I guess in this, of course, in this case, you kind of do both.
So the database is primarily used to connect primary data about products to impact results. So the more primary data you have, the more specific you can make those database points. So ideally, at the end, the database that you use for your product is made up from data points accessing lists, libraries, databases, and data points from your own primary data.
Exactly. And I think it's also important here, of course, that there are also different types of data that are important for an LCA. And I think sometimes these databases can be confused because on the one hand, of course, you have the impact database, which is the impact that is associated to a certain material. And on the other hand, of course, you have your own data that you put in, your own data on raw materials, your manufacturing processes, everything, which is also where, of course, the suppliers and the primary data comes in. So these are two different things. And of course, they are both necessary to create a good LCA. So Barbara, could you maybe explain a little bit how you approach that process of gathering data that from internally in your company as well, but also from your suppliers, how you approach that?
Well, since it's been our intention from the beginning to know our data, and we've been reporting internally already, and for a few years, we had the data on textile volumes, etc., already quite ready. But I think what's most relevant to share here also is that the library data, so to say, are mostly used for, the raw materials, but we also have some suppliers who've done LCAs themselves. So where possible, we've actually used those. And currently we use that database and keep expanding it because it helps us build scenarios. So when we have a new knitting technique and we want to see, so, that goes with this and this yarn, which one, would be best fit to the menu. So we actually actively use that database.
Exactly. So you also have suppliers that did LCAs themselves, which actually, of course, makes it a lot easier to, of course, get the exact information you would like on a product. I mean, it's the complete package in a way. All right. Thank you so much for all the questions, and also for Barbara and Annika for answering them.
Okay, so we are at the end of our webinar. So thank you everybody for joining. Keep an eye out on our socials because we will be answering any questions that we didn't get to today, also over there. And yes, thank you, Anik and Barbara. This was really insightful, and it was really cool to get a glimpse into how you selected your materials and that whole process. So thank you very much. And again, if you would like to try out our tool Mobius to test out the materials in your products, or for example, in the t-shirt, we have the 14-day trial, which you can find on our Mobius page, but we'll also be sending that over to you via email. So thank you very, very much, and enjoy your day, and see you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.